you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kira. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Weathering the Storm 2008 and Now. We started this webinar series as a way to help our enterprise community respond to this global pandemic. And one of the things I've always been most proud of here at Workbench is not only our enterprise VC fund, but maybe even more so our enterprise tech community here in New York, whether it's fellow founders, operators, Fortune 500s, giving back and supporting fellow enterprise startups. And there's probably no time more than now with this crisis that we're in that our enterprise community is so deeply appreciated. And that's why I'm very grateful to welcome our guest today, who has been such a big supporter of our Workbench community, speaking at our New York Enterprise Tech Meetup, keynoting at our Enterprise Go-to-Market Summit last year, been an advisor to a number of our Workbench startups. As the co-founder and former CEO of MobileIron, he grew MobileIron to over $150 million a year in revenue, over 1,000 employees, 12,000 enterprise customers, and took the company public in 2014. He's also the author of an awesome book, Survival to Thrival. We give it to all of our founders. And most importantly for our discussion today, he has survived and thrived through two major recessions, the 2001 dot-com bubble and the 2008 financial crisis. So please join me in welcoming Bob Tinker.
Thanks, Jessica. Thrilled to be here and appreciate that you're actually hosting an event like this for the entrepreneurial community. It's a great topic and very timely.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Bob. Now, one of the things we appreciate most about you is just really how real you always keep it. You know, so like us at Workbench, we love keeping things super tactical. So would love to talk through your war stories, and then let's get real for founders and CEOs trying to navigate 2020. Sound good?
Let's do it.
Cool. So let's go back to 2001 first. Can you give us a bit of history where you were at the time, you know, when the dot-com bubble popped?
So, yeah, my first downturn was the 01, 02, 03 dot-com crash. If you remember, that was, you know, like pets.com, when pets can't drive kind of era. In 2002, I left another company to go join a very early stage startup called Airspace. And we did enterprise Wi-Fi. So it's like 2002. It's a 10-person company. It's all engineers and product. I'm like the first business person in the building. And the economy was just a disaster. And you know, I grew up in the Midwest, and my father is a Midwestern manufacturing executive. He thought I was insane to like leave another job in the middle of a downturn, go work for some startup with barely any capital with 10 people. And so that company was called Airspace. We built enterprise Wi-Fi systems, and you know, it was a scary time, but you had to look at Wi-Fi and say, man, this is just going to be a thing. And so instead of being obsessed with scale, we were just like, look, let's go focus on building the product and winning some early customers. And you know, the financing terms we got were terrible. I was the VP of Business Development. Just to give everybody a sense, our terms were 2x liquidation preferences and also participating. So, I mean, they were terrible. But at the same time, like, we needed the capital to build the company. Otherwise, we just should have gone home. So, you know, now fast forward, once the market turned in 03, we were ready to capitalize on it. We grew from like 0 to $80 million. And then Cisco bought us for $450 million in 05. Where Cisco's Cisco's first large acquisition post-crash.
Yeah, so I'd love to hone in on that, right? Because, you know, fundraising, to your point, sucked, right? You got it done, but
terrible.
Not on great terms, and definitely not what most founders would want to be optimizing for now. But you still also managed to go from 0 to 80 million in revenue in 4 years. So it sounds like even with the market crashing, you and your team were still able to do quite well in new sales. So can you just tell us what the customers buying
to be fair,
appetite?
like, if you look at the 09, like 08, 09, like, I'm sorry, 01, 02, 03, when we were like in the very beginning, like we weren't selling that much. Like the team was still pretty small. We just had like a couple salespeople. We were mostly engineers. We were just focused on winning some deals. What really happened is once the market started to turn in 03, we were ready, and then things just went parabolic in '03, '04, and '05. So really that growth was really concentrated in the last sort of 3 years. And I think, why that happened was when the market turned and customers were ready to buy, we actually had a product, and then we could just turn the crank. But the first 2 years were pretty slow. It was
Okay.
tough sledding.
That's helpful to hear, right? To break down what sounds like a very rosy accomplishment. So was the sales
First 2
team
years or anything but rosy.
Yeah, and that's the real talk, right? Were you guys really in cockroach mode then? Because the company was so focused on R&D and product then. What were you doing? Were you going out and at least talking to potential customers and prospects, again, to rev up when the time was right?
Yeah, so sort of paint the picture. Like when I joined in 2002, it was basically, we didn't actually really have a CEO at the time. One of our board members was acting as the CEO. I was the VP of business development. We had a bunch of engineers and product folks. So the company was like 12 people. We then added like maybe 2 sort of Davy Crockett early sales reps. And that was kind of it for like the first year and a half, and me. And we were out talking to customers, out talking to channel partners, trying to win some early deals. But, the product took a while to build. So, we spent the first year and a half kind of building the product. So I wouldn't call it cockroach mode. We were just in sort of focused mode, whereas just like work on your product, work on winning a couple early customers, and, figure out how we could win those customers so that once the market turned, then we could really hit the gas. So, it was sort of a small but mighty focused team. And again, our focus wasn't scale. I think that's one of the things right now. It feels like everybody's always talking about scale, 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 scale. And hey, that's super important. But guess what? Before you scale, you got to survive. And I think at that point, we were just really focused on survival.
Yeah, and being patient, right? This is a question I was going to ask later, but I'll ask it now, is how much pressure were you getting from the board, right, and your investors, right? Were they understanding and saying, hey, we get it. Right now, just focus on product. It's not a revenue priority right now?
Oh, no, we were still getting pressure. Like, what else? Of course. Like, why would a board not put pressure on you for that?
Okay, so at least that has not changed.
Yeah, but I think the real discussion was around how is your progress relative to your burn rate? Like there's a trade-off to be made there. Like what's your progress on product and customers relative to what you're burning? And I think as long as your burn rate is relatively small, you get a lot more leash on figuring out the product and go-to-market stuff. If your burn rate starts to accelerate, then the stakes go up rapidly. So I think, that was what a lot of the discussions were sort of the trade-off between sort of burn rate and progress on product and go-to-market.
Got it. And again, on that sliding scale, investors at least tolerating it based on where you were on that matrix.
I'm sure they were also kind of freaked out too at the same time because it was a rough time in the market. But, when your burn rate's low, it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility to, be able to sort of deal with what comes at you. But, that was sort of a lesson for me to sort of see the 2 stages of a startup, in terms of the early stage, like super skinny team in a tough survival mode. And then the second stage where the market started to turn, we were ready and we hit the gas. So that was sort of a good formative experience for me to sort of see both. And I think in many ways, like founders and execs over the last 7 or 8 years have been in a scenario where they've only seen sort of the second scenario. They haven't really seen the first scenario. And I think it's going to be a pretty big adjustment for everybody to sort of be able to understand what shifting to survival mode looks like.
Awesome. Well, so with that, then let's fast forward then to 2008, right? Because you said in that time, Airspace got acquired by Cisco, 2005. I'd love to hear a little bit of, what you were seeing at Cisco, because then in January of 2008, you actually chose to leave Cisco, which also on a personal note, I too also left my very great cushy job at Cisco 6 years ago to come and co-found Workbench. People thought I was crazy, right? And so when you left, it was actually before the market crashed. Do you think you would have made the same choice if the market had crashed?
Ooh, that's a good question. I probably would have, and I'll tell you why. I'll sort of tell you the story here. So, yeah, for context, so Cisco bought Airspace in 2005, and I signed up for a 2-year gig, but I stayed for 3 because I was actually having more fun than I thought I was going to. So full credit to Cisco. But rewind back to 2007-8, what was happening then is smartphones were starting to show up in the world, and it's going to be funny for everybody now, but there was no iPhone, right? Palm Trio was a big smartphone. Windows Phone was a big smartphone, and BlackBerry wasn't yet a smartphone. It was just a pager. So sort of rewind back to 2007, right? And so one of the side effects of me being in the mobile group at Cisco was I got to work with the Cisco IT team when we rolled out 25,000 Palm Trios to employees worldwide within Cisco. It's probably the largest smartphone deployment in the world at the time. And users were like, this is awesome, I want it. And IT was absolutely miserable. It was so hard for IT to be able to make this work. And I was like, that's interesting. Tidal wave of smartphones, users want it, miserable for IT. Somebody should go do something about that. And so about that same time, one of my coworkers and a colleague spun out to go work on a startup. And that was the beginning of MobileIron. They spent 6 months talking to customers around smartphones, mobility, what were going to be the problem. And when AJ and Suresh approached me about being CEO, and I looked at what they were thinking and the customer feedback, I kind of had one of those moments where I was like, oh crap, I got to go do that.
It's happening again.
Yeah, and it wasn't a totally rational financial decision. Like, I hadn't even invested all my equity at Cisco. I left it on the table because it was just like, this is going to be something that's going to be important and big. And I felt very fortunate to have the opportunity to go do that with Suresh and AJ. And so I left in January 2008 to go start MobileIron. We raised our first round of capital in March 2008, which was like 90 days before all hell broke loose and the financial market imploded. So, one of the interesting backstories for MobileIron is that we just frankly kind of got lucky in terms of raising our first round of capital right before everything went pear-shaped. Now, it was a scary time to be a startup though. 90 days after we got MobileIron off the ground, got our first capital in, Lehman blew up, and then like another 30, 60 days after that, I get this email from Sequoia, which was, hey, mandatory CEO all hands meeting at Quadris at like 4 p.m. on Thursday. Attendance is not optional. And I was like a first-time CEO trying to figure it out, like totally clueless. I'm like, oh, okay. So I just trot up to Quadris, sit down in the little banquet room there, and all the other CEOs are like peeing in their pants because they're like, Sequoia's never had an all-hands meeting like this before. I had no idea. And so up on the wall is the tombstone that says RIP Good Times. So little did I know that was going to be sort of this apocryphal presentation, sort of talking about sort of the changes in 2008. And that was a real wake-up call for me and sort of all the rest of the CEOs. And the messaging from that meeting was basically, number one, the world's changed. We don't know for how long. 2, you need to have 12 months of cash left. If you don't have 12 months of cash left, cut expenses so you can figure out how to get 12 months of cash left. And if you can't do that, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah. Well, even 12 months now sounds like not enough, right? I mean, a lot of the guidance now is 24 months even.
Yeah, I think, where I'm landing is sort of, it's probably more like 18 because you really need 12 months of cash left plus 6 months of cushion to go raise your next round of financing. So that's kind of how I landed at 18. But, it was a scary time. It was like we had 15 people in the company. We were fortunate that we could just keep burn rate low and focus on building our product and winning some early customers and getting our go-to-market. But, when we went to go then raise our second round of capital, a year and a half later, things were still bad. Like, forget, like the market blew up in 08, but 09 was terrible. 2010 was pretty bad too. So when we went to go raise our B in 2010, or I guess it was late 2009, it was pretty wobbly. And I think the reason why we're able to get it done, and I think we could talk about this a little bit more, is that we were able to sort of refine urgency. like when we started MobileIron, we had sort of customer feedback about what the urgent pain and problem was around smartphone security and management. Turns out, like in a downturn, like people aren't as focused on things like productivity.
Yeah.
Right? They're like,
exactly.
look, if you can't help me save money, that I'll maybe buy your product. And we found an urgent problem around cost savings. And so we pivoted to add that to our product and go to market. And I think having refound some sense of urgency in our customers that allowed them to still buy some early deals and say good things, if that hadn't happened, frankly, I'm not sure we would have gotten our second round done. And even when we got it done, it was at a relatively low markup off the last round. So, it was a scary time, but we got it done. Now, fast forward to 2010, as the market started to turn, the lemonade from lemon scenario here is that we didn't have any competitors funded on our back for the last 18 months. So when the market turned, we were ready and capitalized on it and took off, and we went from like 0 to 50 million in revenue in 3 years.
That's amazing. And again, the patience, right? It's saying, hey, I have conviction in what we're building. Now I might have to tweak the messaging.
It's patience,
right?
It's patience informed by fear and a desire to survive.
Yes,
so
exactly.
It's not quite so zen.
Right, exactly. And lots of factors and variables into that. But you were able to change the messaging and positioning, I think, and we're hearing that a lot from our
change the product
now, right?
And change the product, actually.
And
it was
change
not
the
just
product.
the marketing and messaging. We changed the product.
And at what point did you know to do that? Right, because that's what I think so many founders are grappling with right now is they know they need to make a change, but when?
Right away. So I think, this is where, look, I mean, one of the most important things for founders and CEOs and leaders to be doing right now is protect your ARR. So the existing customers you have, make sure you protect them. That's super important. Go talk to them and make sure your sold customers get operationalized. But the second thing is go talk to prospects and opportunities, because it sort of gives you two really important pieces of information. One is, hey, how are your existing pipeline of customers changing their view? Are they all of a sudden evaporating on you and your whole plan blows up, or their sales cycle is going to lengthen? It's key to revising your plan. But equally important is go talk to your customers about where the urgency is. Because if why they were buying you before is no longer as urgent to them, guess what? Those deals are going to slow down, blow up, disappear. But take that opportunity to ask about what are some of the other urgent pains or problems that they may be having. And so for us, we were originally walking into customers and talking about security and management for smartphones. And that was important, security and productivity, super important. But in a downturn like that, what we found was we had sort of this accidental byproduct of our product where we could detect international roaming. And remember back in 2008, 2009, 2010, people were having these surprise, $10,000 roaming bills when they would travel internationally. Well, we could sort of detect that and warn people and help prevent that. And so that gave our potential prospects a hard dollar savings. And that allowed them to go to their boss and justify why they would spend money, because they could say, look, we get these other benefits, but the reason why we're buying it, and we could justify it, is it comes with a hard dollar savings. And by just listening to our customers about what the urgency was, we added that to our product. It was also hard because we had to kind of change our go-to-market pitch and positioning. And turned out we were actually, in some cases, actually talking to a different ideal customer profile. We were actually talking to the telecom department. So if you actually look at some of the early deals we won at MobileIron, some of them were the security and management team, some of them were the telecom team. And I think if we hadn't added that, we wouldn't have been able to win those customers in that really early critical time for us when we were going to be needing to raise our second round of capital. So that refinding urgency is critical, was critical for us at that time. And I think it's super critical for, either early stage or even mid-stage startups right now to make sure you refind urgency. Because if there's no urgency, your pipeline evaporates and deals don't get done.
Yeah, that's right. And you wrote a whole book about urgency and go-to-market fit, right? And that's in assuming relatively normal times. Right now I'm hearing from a lot of our sales leaders that, it's hard to even talk to sometimes existing customers, much less prospects. So any tactical feedback there in terms of course, getting to the top of their inbox, getting them to read, changing the positioning is huge, right? And having an efficiency ROI is critical, it sounds like.
Yeah. So, the if you look at the impact on customers and impact and go-to-market, the way I would put it is that we effectively, and I think startups now will need to effectively refine go-to-market fit. And that has two parts of it. Like, how do you refine urgency? Is there a new source of urgency, a different ICP? Is it a cost savings value proposition? Is there, you got to look a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, a little bit up, and a little bit down to maybe find it. And it feels like heresy actually at the time, because you in some ways sort of feel like you're betraying your founding idea that you started with. But it's critical to look to the left, look up, look right, look down. And that's how we found this cost savings value proposition. The second thing is you're rewiring your go-to-market playbook, because every startup, whether you won 10 customers or 50 customers, has sort of implicit go-to-market playbook for how you find and win customers, whether it's the founder doing it or the early one or two sales reps doing it. And that go-to-market playbook is kind of implicit, like in everybody's behavior and muscles. And rewiring that go-to-market playbook takes real conscious effort. So being able to not just refine urgency, but think about what does this do for my go-to-market playbook, how I find and win customers over and over again, because effectively in a downturn like this where customers' buying patterns change, you're refining go-to-market fit. And it's one of the scariest things for a startup that's been winning deals to have to do, because all of a sudden you thought you had the recipe and now the recipe changed on you. Early stage startups in some way are kind of luckier, because they're still sort of in Davy Crockett mode. Like, we were fortunate at MobileIron that we were still in Davy Crockett mode, trying to find our path through the woods when the world changed on us. And the same thing at aerospace. I think if we had been later stage and sort of thought we knew all the answers and had to kind of go back into Davy Crockett mode, that's really hard.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. Well, I think it's a great transition to the tactical piece that we have on the slides here, right? Because I know founders are listening to this, and specific to the enterprise sales and go-to-market part, right? How do I know how much I need to change this plan, right? It sounds like what you were saying earlier, quite a bit and quickly. How do I think about attacking different verticals and segments? So, in 2008, did you stay away from financial services, right, for some time, right? And then lastly is the sales team, right? I think we have a lot of empathy for sales teams who right now may not be bringing in net new logos. And it's tough, right? Do you adjust targets, spiffs, OTEs? So if you could break that down a little bit.
Yeah, so at a meta level, there's kind of three big buckets of things that as CEO or founder, like we'd all be kind of wrestling with right now. The first one is, what does this mean for, my customers, my prospects, and my go-to-market? The second thing is, what does this mean for my operating plan to be able to ensure survival? And the third thing is, what does it mean for my team? So, we talked a little bit about what it means for the go-to-market and customers. Let's talk about what it means for sort of the sales team. And, a lot sort of depends on what stage you're at right now. I think, like I said, like if you are at sort of founder selling stage and like one Davy Crockett sales rep, kind of stay there. Don't go, like you probably had this plan to go hire a bunch of people. Like, don't do that unless you're really sure. Right. If you've got a beefed out sales and marketing team of 10, 20, 30 people, things get harder, because all of a sudden now, like, your forward revenue doesn't look like what it used to. And I will tell you, one of the scariest things that I sort of learned the hard way is that when you miss your plan and all of a sudden, instead of growing like this, you're growing like this, cash burn can absolutely explode. All of a sudden you can double your cash burn, which effectively cuts your runway in half. suddenly, and it's terrifying. And, you know, sales and marketing is often sort of one of the biggest expense pools. So it's obviously sort of one of the first places to go rethink about your plan. So maybe let's hold off on the plan discussion for a second, just sort of talk about the, you know, the go-to-market team. So the biggest question to be asking is, do you have the right type of go-to-market people? Because in many cases, you have to go back into kind of Davy Crockett mode to refine urgency. Some sales and marketing folks can naturally iterate and try new things and kind of be Davy Crockett. Some just need a playbook and they repeat it over and over again. And so the first thing you need to do is ask yourself, do you have the right go-to-market people in the building? The second thing is, how are you spending money in your go-to-market? The tendency, I found myself doing this, is go straight to sort of sales rep and quota capacity and be like, we have too much quota capacity, cut reps. And, you know, that may be the right answer to reduce quota capacity, you know, but at the same time, like, sales reps are variable expense. You know, you only pay their variable if they actually make their number. So in some ways, there's a little bit more of a leveraged bet inside there. You know, the thing that I found was that it's the unramped reps that really drive the cash burn. If you have fully productive reps that are, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80% of their quota, like, they're actually generating net positive revenue for the company, net positive cash. Where the real cash burn and go-to-market happens is if you're growing your sales team and you got a couple reps that are all in ramp mode that aren't yet achieving their quota. So sort of pull apart your sales team and sort of the reps that are, you know, ramped and unramped. And there's a very different sort of cash burn situation for both of those. The other thing would be look more broadly at sales and marketing spend. It's easy to sort of look at quota headcount and be like, go focus there. The reality is, if you pull apart your sales and marketing expense and divide like how much sales and marketing expense you're doing per quota carrying rep, where's that expense coming from inside the sales and marketing universe? Because that's actually in many cases places you can go look, reduce expenses and yet still keep your quota capacity the same. Lastly, you know, this is also an opportunity to sort of think differently about sales compensation. You know, there'll be people with sort of two minds on this one. Some people will say, hey, look, don't change quotas, just leave them the way they are. I'm personally not a fan of that. I think in a situation like this, you need to sort of rethink quotas, because the reality is that all your sales and go-to-market team are operating in a different environment, and leaving the old quotas in place just kind of doesn't make sense. But I think it's important to not just change the number, but rethink the structure. I'll tell you sort of what we did in the early days of MobileIron, and this turned out to work really well, and it's advice I give to founders in the early stage of building go-to-market teams, is one of the mistakes I made in the early days was to just think about assigning quota and compensation tied strictly to winning new ARR. It's sort of the logical thing to do, and your board's going to tell you, hey, hire some salespeople, go win revenue. Yay. But the reality is, if you think about what you want your go-to-market machine to be doing at that time, you want it to be doing multiple things, particularly right now in a world where you're refining go-to-market fit. So instead of thinking about sales comp just as ARR, break it up. Break it up into a couple different buckets and say, okay, part of their variable compensation is tied to winning new ARR, of course. But a second bucket might be tied to winning new proof of concepts or evaluations that are more tied to forward pipeline around sort of finding new urgency. Because what you don't want to do is have everybody go just try and close deals on old value propositions that aren't going to work in the future. You need to start having people be thinking about pipeline and future urgency. You could have part of their compensation tied to lead generation, part of their compensation tied to helping redevelop the new go-to-market playbook. So I think being overly simplistic about sales comp and just saying go win new ARR is not the right thing to be doing when rethinking quotas. Think about what exactly you need to get done inside your go-to-market machine and break up the quota and ARR and tie it to that. Because effectively in a time like this, particularly when you're downsizing the team, you're asking more people to wear more hats. And that's a way to sort of effectively tie the compensation structure to what people really need to be doing.
Yeah, that's helpful perspective to hear because, you know, speaking with a number of other sales leaders, some, like you say, are of the mindset, keep target, keep plan, but just make up for it with spiffs, right? And say, hey, here's some spiffs for number of new meetings booked or some lead gen. So it's helpful to hear your philosophy, which is, hey, you know, the world has changed so much.
That if the change is not that drastic, that might work. You know, I think for most companies, the reality is they're going through a major replanning exercise.
Yeah.
And going to have to certainly not hire new people, and in most cases actually cut people. All right. And this is brutal, like doing these kind of replanning exercises that have impacts on the team. So just shifting around spiffs, I'm not sure moves the needle if you have to cut half your team.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it'd be useful to shift to sort of thinking about the business plan here too, because you know the go-to-market compensation and the go-to-market planning fits into a much bigger question that out there, you know, the CEOs and founders I've been talking to over the last 4 weeks. I think, you know, the biggest question that I hear people struggling with is, hey, look, I know I need a new plan. I know I need a new business plan. I know I need to make sure I have at least 12 months of cash left, maybe 18. Like, there's sort of this slider out there of, do I, on one hand, drastically change my business plan all the way to presume I'm never raising any more capital and I need to make it to cash flow break even on the cash I got. To the other end of the spectrum is, don't change anything, keep the plan we have. And I think the trick is sort of there's a whole slider of spectrum in between those two things. And I think CEOs are struggling with sort of, how do I decide sort of where on that slider we need to be? And, you know, this is a tricky question. And I think, you know, some advice I would have on this one and some things that we did when we were going into major replanning mode. You know, there's some obvious stuff like take into account more conservative market realities, slower customer sales cycles, increased churn. You got to go through your pipeline to make sure, you know, whatever pipeline you have is requalified because a lot of it's going to be disappearing on you. Like that's sort of inputs to the equation, but that doesn't actually help you really decide sort of where on the slider you are here. The thing that helped me a lot was to think ahead and work backwards. So my big suggestion here is think ahead to what are the milestones you need to achieve as a business 12 or 18 months out when you need to raise your next round of capital. Like think about it, like what is it? Okay, you know, we need to be at 2 million ARR, we need to have a pipeline of this, we need to have a repeatable go-to-market that looks like that. You know, whatever those milestones are, the old milestones were probably totally nuts. Like we need to go from 2 to 10 million in ARR and be super big and fast, right? Rethink those milestones of where you need to be 12 and 18 months out to raise your next round of capital, and then work backwards. And then you sort of iterate on that, and you can sort of see the resources required and the cash burn to be able to do that. And then you sort of move that in and out to sort of figure out what your plan needs to look like between here and there. And I found that super helpful to me, was to think to my next set of milestones and then kind of work backwards as a way to iterate on sort of where on that slider need to be.
Yeah.
And then the nice part about it is what pops out is your goals as a company. And you had your old goals, and now guess what? Here are our new goals. And that's sort of a helpful thing to decide where on the slider you are. The second thing, and this was really good advice that was given to me by one of my board members, which in retrospect is kind of obvious, but I wish I'd known earlier, is in a SaaS business, you can effectively pull apart your SaaS business into two parts. There's like a fixed part of your business and a variable part of your business. The fixed part of your business is your renewal pool times your gross margin. You can think about that like that's generating repeatable cash. And your fixed expenses are your R&D and product and G&A teams. And they're sort of tied together. The other side of your business is a variable business, which is you have sales and marketing expense tied to generating new ARR. And so I found it helpful to sort of pull apart thinking about the plan into those two buckets. How am I spending on R&D, G&A, and product relative to what my renewal pool looks like and what's happening with my renewal pool? And on the other side, what am I spending on sales and marketing? How do I turn that dial relative to what I'm expecting in new ARR? And that helped sort of structure sort of the trade-offs that get made inside where on sort of the slider you want to be. So hopefully that's helpful to folks out there.
That is helpful. And I think, the one variable in this slider is understanding renewals, right? Because there's one thing about new logos, but then there's understanding existing customers. What is churn going to look like? A lot of us have been hoping that this was not going to be a longer term, after effects. But I think that's the big TBD a lot of founders are trying to grapple with and predict.
Yeah, that's why you got to go out and talk to your customers and protect your existing ARR. One of the things you get, I think we had a rough quarter in 2013, 14. And one of the reasons that happened was our churn spiked. And the reason our churn spiked was that we were taking too long to get our big customers operationalized. If you look at, once customers are operationalized and really using your product, their ability to churn goes way down, right? It's the customers who bought that all of a sudden the priority of implementing your product gets put on the back shelf. That is a super high risk of churn. So this is one of those inputs to your planning question about, where does my renewal pool look like, is you got to go talk to your existing customers and make sure you're operationalizing those customers that you won in the last year so that they get over the hump. So then their potential to churn is much lower.
Yeah. Two quick questions I see a few coming in. One is around outbound, right? And we touched a little bit on this. It's just, feeling like outbound is probably the most reliable way to generate demand, whether it's the new verticals and the new messaging. How do you operationalize customers faster? So this is, I believe, tied to onboarding, right? I think those are some of the questions coming in from our community.
Yeah, so let's talk about the targeting question. I mean, I think, often this idea of sort of refining go-to-market fit in a downturn gets sort of phrased as we have to go think about different verticals. And I don't actually think that's the right way to think about it. Because yes, you can sort of rule out certain verticals, like selling to airlines right now is probably not a great idea, right? You can rule out certain verticals, but it's not really about, let me go try a new vertical. It really is about, how do I go back and find urgency again? Urgency may be in a different vertical. It may be a different type of buyer. It may be a different value proposition that your product had or could have that you haven't taken advantage of yet. So this idea of verticalizing is important, but I think it's kind of missing the point. It's really about finding urgency wherever it is, and that may or may not involve verticals. In terms of doing outbound, the answer to that just depends so drastically on sort of your business and customers. Are you a sales-led go-to-market, a marketing-led go-to-market, a product-led go-to-market? That one's sort of hard to answer in the general case. I think you just have to sort of shift into Davy Crockett mode, whatever that looks like for you, and make sure you're exploring and talking to the right number of customers and prospects to be able to figure out where your new urgency is. I'll give you a cool example I just saw from the consumer world. So OpenTable right now is just getting absolutely slaughtered, right? Well, I just got an email from an OpenTable that they said, hey, reserve your spot in the grocery store line via OpenTable. I'm like, bravo to them. Their existing value proposition is zero right now in making reservations, but they were able to sort of find an urgent problem that their product could be repositioned as to go solve. And I was like, that's a great example. I realize that's not a B2B example, but good for those guys for sort of casting a wider net to think about where they could apply themselves and find a new point of urgency.
Yeah, the up, down, left, right that you mentioned. How do you identify early adopters with when you were talking to them for MobileIron, right? I mean, were there specific attributes that you could say, hey, I can tell these guys are going to be way better to talk to right now?
This is sort of the Davy Crockett find your path through the woods. What Davy Crockett mode looks like is you've got either the founder or a couple sales reps or a couple ISRs or SDRs just trying to get prospects to talk to you. And you're going to try what used to work, and suddenly that's not going to work. So you're going to try new things. Let me try this. Let me try that. And, we had this whiteboard. Mike Lee was one of our early Davy Crockett sales reps. He had this whiteboard, this cube that sort of had on the left side what got customers to keep talking to me, and on the right side, what I tried to get customers to talk to me about, but they weren't interested in. So in effect, like startups and refining urgency are going through the Mike Lee whiteboard exercise of what gets people to keep talking to you is a really good sign for where the urgency comes from, and presupposing what that is. I have no way to sort of have input on that. It's sort of up to everybody out there to sort of figure that out for themselves, for their customer base and their market.
Yeah. Well, my last question, I technically have two, but one more is something that's perhaps not touched on enough, but I know it's a huge area of passion for you, Bob, which is your second book, is really you're all around constantly reinventing yourself as a CEO. And I know so many of our founders right now are so focused on taking care of their team and taking care of their customers. How should or if CEOs be reinventing themselves right now?
Yeah, one of the things that, to recognize obviously is that the world's changed. And your team needs to hear from you, the world's changed, take immediate obvious actions, and you got to go together, figure out what your new plan is. The thing is that when big changes happen to your company, big changes happen to your job, and in some cases need to happen to you. And I think, in many ways, sort of the things that we all learn to get us from A to B become the things that sort of get in our way and hold us back going from B to C, or in refining our way from A to B in this case. And that unlearning exercise is kind of a pain in the ass, because all of a sudden you have to let go of things that work for you. I always sort of had a little bit of a tendency in this time, whenever we sort of hit a crisis mode, that I sort of felt like everything was on my shoulders. And I had this tendency to go, all right, I need to have the answers for the team. I would sort of lock myself in a room and be like, hey, ta-da, here's the new plan. That was not the right thing to do. The better thing to do would be to make the team part of it. Ask, what should we be doing differently? Painting, what are our old goals? What are our new goals? Put them up next to each other and sort of do that together. I had a little bit of a tendency to sort of put too many things on my shoulders. Sometimes the buck is yours and it's lonely and that stinks. But, one of my lessons was involve others. The second thing is that there's this weird sort of schizophrenic dual personality in times like this, where, there's a lot of people sort of talking about lead with empathy, and yeah, that's true. But I think what people aren't talking about is there's also a lot of ruthlessness that needs to happen. And, that's not pretty, it's not nice, but there's this odd duality of sort of, as CEOs and leaders right now, people have to be really clinical and really ruthless at the same time as they're being empathetic. And there's sort of a schizophrenic duality to that. And I think we just had to get used to that. And, I struggled with that.
Yeah, I think that's something we've been hearing about a lot from all of our startups, right? That balance. And I love that we've only been hearing about empathy. And I think it's so important that you do hit on ruthlessness. Because
that ruthlessness works a lot of different ways, right? Like, you're just in survival mode, not optimization mode. Like, look, if people are going to go try and raise capital out there, the terms are going to get worse. Like, my advice would be, don't sweat a couple points of dilution here and there. Like, it's not really going to matter. Surviving and building a successful business is what's going to matter. It's either going to be worth something or not. So, like, there's also sort of a level of, like, letting go of sort of these hyper optimizations that I think we've all been trained to pay attention to. The mission right now is just don't die and set yourself up for when the market finally turns, you're ready.
That's so helpful. And I know, your dilution piece is a lesson. Any other final lessons you want to end our discussion on?
The one of the best pieces of advice I got, when MobileIron went through, a couple different crises, was never let a good crisis go to waste. When you're in the middle of it, it sucks. Like, you just feel like your head's in a meat grinder. But a crisis is a great opportunity to accelerate change. And it could be, man, we got to go figure out how to define this new product value proposition, go build it really fast. Or, hey, we need to really rethink our go-to-market. Or, hey, you know what? We got to totally change our resource investments. Like, there's a lot of changes that might be on your mind as a CEO or a leader that maybe just never seemed like you could get them through without too much brain damage. Well, a crisis is a great time to do that. And, it's an opportunity for accelerated change. And, I think what I learned a couple times, whether it's a, Airspace or MobileIron, is for those companies and the leaders that adapt and capitalize on these rough times, on the backside of that is when great companies get built. And, that's the lemonade out of lemons.
I love that. Empathy and ruthlessness. Well, I want to thank you so much, Bob. Huge thank you for all of your insights and tactics today. This has been so incredibly helpful. We cannot recommend your book, Survival to Thrival, enough. It's seriously a Bible for B2B founders. And again, you talk about go-to-market fit and urgency at length in the book. So everyone check that out. We'll have more webinars scheduled coming up with our special focus on enterprise sales and go-to-market. So sign up for our newsletter at workbench.com to get those updates. We also released an enterprise sales guide, the COVID edition. If folks would like to check that out, we've collated top sales tactics from enterprise founders and leaders out there like Bob Tinker. So with that, many thanks, Bob. And thank you, everyone. And please stay safe.